Hi! So my name's Abbie, and I'm going to be giving a talk, which I'm hopefully not going to overrun on, but I do get a little bit passionate about this, about why marketing your studio is just as important as marketing your games. So personally, I think it's very important, otherwise this would be a pretty weird talk to be doing. I think it's a really important part of the marketing mix, is often overlooked by many game studios because you focus on marketing your games, which makes perfect sense because that is what makes you your money. But I think that building your employer profile is slowly gaining traction in the industry. More and more studios are doing it, but it still is quite overlooked and not that common to have people solely just doing the job that I do. So the reason I'm doing this talk and the reason why I chose this career is that I believe it's important, growing, and necessary part of being a studio in this industry. Because marketing your games is a necessity. Everybody knows this. There might be the odd troll on the internet who tells you the good games don't need marketing, but we all know that they're idiots, I hope. So I think the question I always ask myself is, if you know that's important, then why isn't marketing your studio not just as important? So, because when you're talking about games, there are studios out there that don't necessarily have a title to talk about. There's third-party developers, there's outsourced studios, there's publishers, and they're all a really big and important part of the massive amount of variety that we have in the games industry. But they don't have as many things to talk about as normal traditional AAA game studios do. So what do they talk about? That's basically what I think is important. So just to introduce myself, those of you who don't know me, my name's Abbie. I'm brand communications manager at Rebellion. I've been doing brand comms, PR, media events, and everything else that falls under that lovely broad bracket of marketing for about 6 years. 3 of those have been in the games industry. So I started doing marketing at a cashback app, which is a little bit different from the games industry, many moons ago. And I found that I loved marketing and I hated the content I was doing it about. So I'd much rather talk about something I'm passionate about, which is games. So I ended up looking for a job in the industry, and I ended up working at Games Jobs Direct, which is a jobs board. You might have heard of it. I was their head of marketing for about 18 months. And one of the things that I wanted to do was to bring people to the website, obviously get people to come and apply for the jobs, work with our clients, get them to talk about themselves and how they promote themselves to the industry. And I kept talking to lots and lots of our clients, and the things that they kept coming up with over and over again was their project. They wanted to talk about the project, the next project, the new project. And they're never really talking about themselves and culture or what they do. The issue that I had was when I came to the third-party developers that were also clients. So they didn't know what to talk about. They were really, really struggling with that. And I thought the answer was really, really obvious. Talk about yourself. Not your project, not what you create, you. Why do your developers get up in the morning and want to come and work for you? Because the vast majority of people who join game studios, I would argue, don't necessarily do it for the project. They do it because the culture's great, because they love the people they work with, because they really buy into what the studio is actually doing on a long-term basis. Because there is such a variety of game studios out there, and not all of them are covered. Not everybody's Naughty Dog, basically. Not everybody wants to go and work for Naughty Dog. Sometimes there are smaller, free-to-play markets. There's mobile developers. There's same as outsourced studios, there's third-party studios that all need those people to come and work for them. So talk about why they should come and work for you, not one of those big AAA companies. I was one of those people who was working outside of the industry, who loved the games industry and did not know how they were made. I personally thought it was absolute magic after working in a games studio for just over a year now. It still is magic. I still have no idea how it is made, but I like talking about it at least. And I was really, really engaged in that process, and I don't think I'm the only one. People love to know how their favourite games are made. Not just that the favourite games are made, but how they're made, dev diaries, behind the scenes, those sort of things that come up again and again and again. And it's something that we don't talk about enough on our own channels, on our social media. It's not something that we sell enough to people in the industry, I don't think. So I think you should be doing it more. So all of these things, they vary wildly from studio to studio. There's a massive range of studios in the UK, as I've already mentioned. They're doing things completely differently to each other. So tell that story. That was the message I was giving to our clients when I was working at Games Jobs Direct. And it worked really, really well for us. We ended up having a massive range of clients that came on. People were coming to the site not just to find jobs, but to find out a little bit more information about what we were doing. And most importantly for me at least, I loved doing it. I found it incredibly interesting. I got to talk to a whole host of different studios doing a whole host of different things, and a whole host of different devs doing things differently as well. And when I got the opportunity to do that for one studio instead of 20, I jumped at it. And yeah, I've loved it ever since. Rebellion is a really, really, really unique opportunity when it comes to this, because we do games, we do films. I've made a list on here because I will forget them. Games, films, TV, mocap, virtual production, tabletop games, comic and book publishing. And we have one of the biggest costumers in Europe. Because why not? So I get to look at the branding and telling the story of the studio across all those different aspects and how they all cross-pollinate and interact with each other, which is brilliant. And I find it really, really interesting. So less about me and more about getting back to the topic. So why marketing your studio is just as important as marketing your games. So this industry is amazing. I love it. I think most people who work in it do, because otherwise they wouldn't. But this industry does have a problem. I personally believe that the prevalence of NDAs, secret projects, and the idea of, oh, you can't possibly know what we're making because it's all too secret and we can't have it leaking and blah, 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 has allowed for an opacity within the industry, and it's allowed for bad work practices to flourish, for bad actors and just terrible toxic cultures to fester. And I personally believe that one of the ways that we can sort of combat this a little bit is by talking about what we're actually doing in our studios. I know for underrepresented people, I mean, I'm saying this as a white cisgendered woman, so I'm not exactly at the bottom of the pile when it comes to privilege, but it can be a really, really difficult industry to navigate. When you're going to have a look for a new studio, for somewhere to work, you know, as a woman, as a person of colour, as somebody from one of those underrepresented groups, it can be a little bit of a toss-up about whether you're going to go into a studio, which is going to promote you, who's going to give you career opportunities, is going to let you grow and get better, or someone that's going to abuse you, oppress you, and push you out of the industry altogether. It can be a massive toss-up for people, and I think that's something that this industry really does have to grapple with, and we are doing that more and more and more. I think that one of the ways we can do that relatively, I mean, it's not going to fix it overnight, obviously, but I do think one of the ways that we can combat this is by being a bit more transparent about how our studio works. I should not clap in front of the mics. Being a bit more transparent about how our studios work, what the culture is like, what it's like on a day-to-day basis to go into the studios, what your studios care about, and being able to talk about that so that when somebody is looking for information about you, they're looking to join you, they can find that information easily, and they're not having to go through whisper networks or ask friends of a friends about whether it's actually going to be a terrible place to work or not. So yeah, by opening up, it's, okay, sorry, I'm laughing at my own notes. So in my utopian idea of what the future of the video game industry looks like is that every single studio will talk about their culture. That if they don't, that will become the red flag that stops you from being able to go and work there, because you can't find information on what it is actually like to be at that studio, work at that studio, and be a part of that culture. We have another problem, recruitment. So I used to work for Games Jobs Direct, obviously, which was part of the recruitment industry. My current manager thinks that I talk about employer branding in the recruitment framework a little bit too much. But he's not here, so I get to talk about what I want. I think it's a really good way of framing that idea of your employer brand, because who are the people who are most interested in wanting to come and find out about who you are? It's people that you're hiring, right? So they're the people who are going to be looking for that information online and trying to find out who you are. Also, when you're thinking about your employer branding, you're thinking about your culture, you think about how you communicate that to the outside world. Thinking about it in terms of recruitment is a really useful one, because you've got a team, probably internally, that is already putting out those messages, it's already telling that story, who's already selling your studio to the outside world, and that's your talent team. So they are already talking to people on a day-to-day basis about why people should come and work for you, about what's great about your culture, about what you care about what you're going to be doing long term. They're selling people on you. But why is that information hidden away to only people going for interviews? Why is that information not more widely available? Why can they not tell that story about who you are a bit more widely? I just think that it's a little bit of a no-brainer, and it's part of your story that's just not being told. So tell it. I think it's a great way of kicking off thinking about your studio branding, because it is that kind of why people want to work for you. How do you tell the story of a studio? Where have you been? Where you're going? What are your ambitions, your values? And it also gets you to think about how you're keeping your best talent as well. They're the people who are going to make your next big project. They're the people who are going to make your games great. So how are you keeping them? I mean, we all know that every single studio on the planet is looking for a technical artist, is looking for a lead programmer. It's a problem that every single studio has. So why are your technical artists, why are your lead programmers not looking to move somewhere else? If you're thinking about how you're selling it, it gives you a little bit more ideas about how you can keep those people on internally, what your culture is like, what you can improve, what you can make better. And as oh yeah, this is a bit, sorry. I know I'm just reading my own notes. Saying there is a shortage of great talent in this industry. You can blame Brexit, and you absolutely should, because it's a fucking disaster, and I could talk for like 45 minutes just on that point, but I won't. You can blame a lack of progression and training opportunities, older devs leaving the industry, younger devs being pushed out of the industry, suppressed pay versus other industries, the passion problem, as I like to call it. I think that I was talking to one of our senior QAs actually, and he was saying about how he could go and work doing QA for an accounting company in central London and double the amount that he does now, but he doesn't because he loves QA and games. So I think passion suppresses wages, which means people aren't paid as much as they can do in other industries, so they leave when they're a bit older and need the money. I think that's easy enough to do. So every studio puts out generic job posts telling people they're looking for senior technical artists. Here's two that I did quite recently for Rebellion. But it's all well and good doing this, but you know, as I said, everyone and their mum's looking for these roles. So what are you offering? How are you getting people in? How are you selling them on your culture? Where are you going? What are you doing? And it's not just about the projects. This is why it's important, because that is how you bring those people in. So a great place to start with this is by chatting to the people in your studio. That's what I did. When I joined Rebellion, I had Zoom meetings, because I joined during COVID, with about 50 different people to ask them why they worked there. I just thought it was a really, really good place to start, just having a chat with them about why they joined, why they stayed, what they like about the studio. And that creates a really good starting point for how you're telling your story, because they're the ones who are living and breathing that story at the moment. I just joined. I had no idea what it was like. I had no idea what it was like during COVID, especially because I was sat in my living room. Whereas these are people who've been at the studio for years. But I also made sure I was speaking to a good, diverse range of people. So it's not just your C-suite. It's not the people who are really invested in wanting people to stay. I was talking to people who've been there 2 months, junior artists, QAs, people like that, and what impression they were getting from Rebellion. So we could start building that story, so we can start building that culture, so we can start working out how best to tell that story to the outside world based on what we already had internally. So, yeah, what are you offering? Don't hide that information because you're too busy talking about your games, because without your devs, without talent, nothing gets made, no projects get sold. Great talent underpins all of your projects you make, and you have to sell them on who you are. So, as I said, people don't just join people for the project. So tell them what it's like in the studio. What's a culture like? What's a work-life balance like? How do they find out that story if you're not telling it, is the next part of that conversation. If they are looking to try and find out about who you are, where can they currently find that online? Glassdoor, obviously, is a nice first one to go for. Just 2 minutes on Glassdoor, because again, people don't like it when I talk about this too much at work. But I think it's actually a really, really useful tool. But as with all review sites, you only leave a review if something's really, really good, really, really crap, or you're incentivized to do so. And so it's a job at the end of the day. Yes, we all love the industry. Yes, we're all very passionate about it. But do you have a 100% great time the entire time you're at work? No. So you're probably not going to be like, I'm going to leave a great review of where I work, because that would be weird. So if you've had a crap time, though, you're way more likely to put a review of that up there. And if you're incentivized to do so, it means people leave like 4-star reviews and have 3 lines in it, so it doesn't actually add or detract at all. I think the Glassdoor is an important tool, but it should be part of the story that you're telling. So it shouldn't work in a vacuum. That's where you have a problem with Glassdoor, and this is when your HR gets really, really focused on it, about bringing those star ratings up, is when it's the only thing out there about you, and people are going like, oh, but we haven't got enough stars. If it's only part of the mix, you can kind of ignore it. If you've got a wider conversation about who you are, what you do, your culture, I'm repeating myself, but if all of that information's out there, then this can just become part of the story. It only becomes an issue when it's working in a vacuum. Yeah. Next bit is who your audience. Who are you talking to? So we all know what this is when it's games, is people are going to buy your games. When it comes to talking about your studio, you want to talk to professional game developers because they're the people you want to hire. They're the people who are going to be most interested in that story to begin with. And I mean, that's just a little bit obvious. Aspiring game developers are the next group you want to go for. Students as well, obviously. They're going to be your leads in the future. You want to inspire them. If you go to events, if you do talks at universities, these are the things they're going to remember you for in the future. They're going to have a really positive idea of who you are because you gave back to them when they needed it. With the best will in the world, lecturers are not game developers, or they will have been up until quite recently, but they're not working in the industry as of right now. And the industry is really, really broad, as I was saying before. There's so much variety in there, so many different studios doing so many different things. They won't necessarily get a full overview about who the UK games industry is if they're just hearing from 2 or 3 people from AAA developers. So it's a really good idea just to have that information out there. It creates a resource that they can refer back to. And these are just people that you're going to be wanting to talk to, so people you're going to want to hire and inspire in the future. And gamers with interest in game development. I was that person. I used to play loads of games and I had absolutely no idea there was a space for me in this industry. And I hope I'm contributing to it now. But I was from a working class background and I'm a girl. So generally speaking, I didn't hear about how to work in the games industry from schools. Whereas I think the industry should be giving back a little bit more and going and talking to people who are not just at, Oxford Uni or wherever it is. It's your favourite one. We have an office in Oxford. That's why it's just sprung to mind. But there's a whole host of people there that you can be talking to, you can be telling your story to and telling them how you make games so you can inspire people to want to know about you and want to know how you make your games. And if you don't know where to reach people, so I get this question a lot, especially when it comes to recruitment. If you're wanting specifically to talk to programmers because you desperately need to hire programmers, ask your programmers. I think that a lot of your game developers, I think all of your game developers are your greatest asset and you should be using them more. At the end of the day, they are programmers who are working in this industry who were interested in you enough to join. And you hired them for a reason. There's a reason why you wanted them to come and join your team. So ask them where they spend their time online, where they found out about you, and what sort of information would have been useful and interesting to them. And that you can help build a framework there about what you talk about in terms of your studio in the future. And this is a hill that I will definitely die on. Your internal culture absolutely has to match your external messaging. The games industry is small. There's a lot of people working in it, but everybody knows everyone. It's really nomadic, people move around, and you're going to know someone or know someone who knows someone who has worked at most studios in this country. So if you are standing there and telling a story about how your teams work, about how much you care about diversity, about how much you celebrate LGBTQ developers, all of this positive stuff, and you don't actually do it, it's going to come crumbling down so quickly. So if your culture's not great, do the work and make it better. If you're not actually investing in your diverse devs, do the work and make it better. You absolutely cannot just talk the talk with this stuff. You have to walk the walk. Tokenism and box-ticking exercises mean nothing, and lip service means nothing. If you're saying one thing publicly to build your studio brand and you are not doing the work, it takes one person to bring that down. And that's not to say you can't talk about it unless everything you do internally is perfect. I think they're starting to think about this, starting to look at it, looking at culture, how it's working, the support processes you have in place for your POC developers, for example. It's you can share that information about how you're getting better, about how you're increasing diversity in your studio, about how you're hiring better, about how you're supporting people better. This can all form part of that conversation and part of that story that you're telling about yourself. And one of the great things about my job is that I get to work with lots of people across the company because everybody has to be bought into this. Everybody has to want to work on this employer branding. It all comes back to the idea the internal has to match the external. Because if you've not got a great culture, but you're saying you do, it's going to come crumbling down very, very quickly. So I work really closely with our HR, internal comms, and people team to make sure that the events that we're doing internally are good, that people like them, that we're supporting developers, that we are building on it, iterating on it at all times. As I said, started with the recruitment and talent team in terms of getting that information together about how they are selling your company to people, how they're getting to people to come and work for you. It's I started there with that story, and then I now sit in the marketing and content community team, so I can get them to start making content around that, so we can start telling that message to the outside world, using PR pieces and all those extra added bits we all know in the marketing mix. It's like, these are all things that can work together, and I feel like it's really important to make sure everybody's on the same page. So I speak to a lot of our devs really, really regularly, which quite a lot of people don't. I mean, especially not in the marketing team. They might speak to like 2 or 3 devs who work on any particular game. But I speak to loads and loads and loads of people who work for us to make sure that story I'm telling is actually reflected. Otherwise, it doesn't work, in my opinion. So now I've entirely convinced you that you need to be doing employer branding. Here's my sort of ideas about how to start with it. So I think that humanizing your brand is an incredibly important part of this. I can make an absolutely, well, maybe not me, but I could tell someone to make an absolutely beautiful design that says, we are a totally great place to work, but it doesn't hold any weight and no one's going to believe it. If you have a lovely smiling face, like I have here, of 3 of our devs that work at Rebellion. I've been doing a lot of Zoom interviews over COVID, which is why the quality is crap. But get them to talk about the studio, get them to talk about the culture, get them to tell the story for you, because that's what makes that messaging sticky. That's what makes people remember it. And that's what's going to make people remember those lovely smiling faces when they're talking about Rebellion, which I think is great. So yeah, I've said all that. So yeah, again, this is going to create a really valuable resource that people can refer back to. So when they're coming and looking for information about your studio, they're going to be able to find those videos, those images, those blog posts, that social media stuff that's going to have people from specific departments talking about what it's like to work in that department within the studio, what sort of things they're working on, what sort of things they're working with, and the sort of people they're working with as well. And so your staff are the experts in what they do. Let them do the talking. You hired them for a reason. As I said, use people across the biz. I've been speaking to people from C-suite and heads of, all the way to junior artists and QAs. So that's how you create a really rounded picture by including the diversity that you have within the studio. And it leads back to that authenticity thing, which I've written in bold in the corner, because I think that's really, really important. You've got to be authentically telling the story of who you are, because in like it being inauthentic, I was about to say inauthenticity, but I don't think that's a word. If you're going to be inauthentic, it doesn't work, and it's not going to do what you want it to do. It's not going to sell people on your studio. It's not going to sell people on what you're doing and why you're doing it if you're not actually giving an authentic view into what it's like to work for you. What does your studio care about? So every single studio in the country, whether it's a AAA, third party, free to play, mobile, we all want this industry to grow and thrive and get bigger and better. And the only way that's going to happen is if we start investing back in it and increasing some things, doing better at some things that we've been doing bad at, basically. So we want to be bigger and better than yesterday, and that's only going to happen if we put the effort in and realize that the world has changed, and that having 70% white male devs is not how this industry gets better. Diversity creates better games, so we have to invest and encourage in diverse voices, and this is something that I am super passionate about. The studios who are best at this kind of work tend to pick one thing and do it really, really well, so that when you remember that studio, you think, oh yeah, like for example, Splash Damage, they're really, really big on their diversity and inclusion. Or I think, in my opinion, Creative Assembly as well do a really, really good job of positioning themselves as experts. If you have a look at their social media, there is a lot of talks, there's a lot of dev diaries, things on there, which would be really useful for quite a wide range of audiences. It's like, if you pick one of these from a really cynical sort of brand point of view, just makes the messaging a lot simpler and easier. So I've put a list of things on there, obviously. We've got diversity, queer representation, if you care about your work-life balance and your flexibility, because you want to attract people who might have families. If you want to do lots of charity work, educational outreach as well. Like I've mentioned before, being able to go and talk to students in schools or universities about what game development is like at your studio, especially because they want to see a big, diverse range of those studios. That's just giving back as well, and it's something that you can talk about as part of your brand story. And I've put at the bottom, ask your staff again. If you're not sure which one to go for, if you're not sure which one you really want to invest your time and effort and money into, I can guarantee you've got some staff, some devs that are working for you that are already doing work like this off their own backs, that are already giving talks at universities, that are already going to be video game ambassadors within 2 games or doing mentorship through Limit Break. You'll already have activated staff who will get totally on board with this immediately. And then you've already got a group that you can get involved with and get them to do it. For example, for our International Women's Day content, I wanted to make sure we're actually doing something internally off the back of that. It's all well and good going, yay, women, but there actually needs to be something to back it up. As I said, I don't like lip service. So I made sure that we had a women's group, a group in the company where we can get together, we can chat. We've got, private Mattermost servers, and we make sure to jump on Zoom calls quite regularly, and that's mean there's more support structure so that when we want to ask for things from HR and stuff, we've already got the processes in place. We're already supporting those sort of people, which I think is something that's really important to people. But yeah, ask your staff if you're not sure which one you want to do. I think it's a great place to start. And this is a question that it all comes back to. What do you want your studio to be known for? When they say your studio name, do you want them to say, oh, they make X? Or do you want them to say, oh, they make X? And also, they're really lovely to their staff. They always look so happy. It looks like a great place to work. They really care about diversity and inclusion. They're giving back to educational resources. These are things I think are really, really positive for the industry as a whole. And it's something that we all should be striving for at every single one of the studios, to not just be known for the titles that we make, but to be known for what we're actually giving back to the industry as a whole. Like maybe you give your staff loads of volunteer days, you give loads of money to charity, support diversity initiatives. I think that's a way to think about the story that you're telling more widely. This is the end goal. This is what you want people to do. This is the brand awareness. This is the brand evangelism. You want people to stand there and go, this is what we're known for. Rebellion's currently working on this. This is basically my job, which I love because I get to do this 100% of the time. This isn't part of a side project when we're not talking about our games. This is what I'm doing all the time, which is why I think it's really important, and I love it. So, in summary, marketing your studio is incredibly important because it's how people find out who you are beyond the games that you make. It shapes how the industry, businesses, and gamers perceive you. It helps with recruitment, own channel marketing, and internal culture, as well as helping the whole games industry, and creates brand evangelists both internally and externally. And I genuinely think it will create a better games industry for everyone. That might be me thinking in sunshine and rainbows terms, but I do think it will genuinely help if people can just find out information about studios a lot easier, because people are going to care about the games that you make if they care about the studios that made them. They want to see how their favorite games are made and who made their favorite games. And I think giving them that insight, pulling away that curtain and being more transparent is only going to be better for your studios and the industry as a whole. Any questions?
Is this on? Can you hear me? There we go.
Yeah.
So I guess when you're first approaching people, so let's say, well, I'm in recruitment, so I am trying to kind of link recruitment with marketing. Do you think the best approach would be more through actual posts or videos, or a bit of both?
Genuinely, I think it's a bit of both. I think that for every single studio and every single social media audience is different, and it absolutely depends on what works for you. I think that it's a good idea to start with a good mix. So put posts out there, say what you're doing, why you're doing it, create videos with your nice staff talking about it. I've done a huge mix of different social media posts, especially. I think own channels are a great place to start for this sort of stuff because you own the means of production. So I just say that find out what works best for you. Genuinely, test and learn is the best way to do all marketing, in my opinion. So
That's
yeah,
great.
just whatever works for you.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks very much for giving the talk. It was really interesting. You said that there's a single message which is best to put out there for what your studio can do. Does that necessarily mean that you can't have more beneficial messages, or should you just focus on the one that you think is the most important to you as a company? Because obviously, we want all of the companies to do all of the good things. So
absolutely. In an ideal world, I absolutely want everyone to do all of the good things. But I think that when you're starting off, I think it's the best place just to pick one and do it well and get the foundations in place. And you can use those learnings to then go out and get and include more parts of the good stuff as you go along. I just personally think from a really kind of cold-hearted place, it just makes the messaging a lot easier and more straightforward. But yeah, absolutely. There's no reason why you can't do multiple ones of those. I think if you're just starting off, it's best to pick one, personally. You can disagree with me.
Thank you for the great talk. That was fantastic. I have a question about, especially for smaller teams, how do you get buy-in from introverted members who especially don't like being on camera?
I have given people lots of different options of how they want to be included, because I find that even our more introverted members of staff are still really keen to get the message out there. So we've done like written blog posts, we've done LinkedIn messaging, we've done stuff with like none of people's faces on it if they don't want it out there, because some people are funny about that on social media, which is entirely fair enough. I just think that, yeah, it's just giving them the option. Obviously, ideally, you want a lovely smiling face on a video who's doing a nice, approachable smile and everybody loves it, but that's not the case for everybody. And I just think it's just giving people options.
When you've got kind of a brand channel that's talking quite a lot about your own games, does it make sense to have a kind of secondary channel? Because obviously, I talk about on a lot of our channels, we've got just this constant stream of all of our games. Do you think it makes sense to have a separate channel just to talk about careers, or do you think it makes sense to kind of have them all on one channel so you can reach those kind of gamers and game developers alike?
I'm an advocate of having just the one channel, to be honest. I think that it's a really good, it includes all of the things you want to talk about. And it means you can break up that sales messaging as well. If you're talking about who you are and your recruitment and all, it just gives a more holistic view about who you are as a company. Rebellion's a bit of a funny beast with that. We have completely separate ones because we've got like 17 different companies. So we're trying to make sure that our main Rebellion channel incorporates other parts of the business as well. That's why we have separate channels for our games. But we've still been encouraging extra things added on there. So for like Sniper Elite, for example, we want to do like dev diaries and things like that. So it shows behind the scenes of the games a little bit more, which adds to that brand messaging, and it can just all work together as one. But I'm personally not currently professionally an advocate of just having the one channel. Cool. I think that's it then. Thanks, guys.